Today I want to talk about arguing with people. I get in arguments with people all the time. What I want to talk about today is the reasons why we argue, also how we argue, when does it make sense to argue with someone, and when does it not make sense to argue with them. First of all, let's look at the reasons why we argue. I mean, we can get into arguments for all sorts of different reasons. A lot of them have to do with the ego. You want to feel important, you want to feel smart, you want to be right, you want to win. Somebody says something you don't like, you feel that you're superior to them, you jump in. I've done this many times. You jump in, you're trying to demonstrate that they're an idiot, and you get into a back and forth with them. But those are kind of childish reasons to get into an argument. I try not to do that anymore. I am impulsive by nature, but I try to control that part of me. So I would say that a good reason to argue with someone is if the position that the other person presents is in conflict with some kind of value that you hold dear. Then you have to argue. Sort of feel like you have to argue. Or if somebody's basically you bottom line is you want to try and convince them of something that you feel is a better truth than what they have. You want to educate them, or you want to convince them. Or you're arguing with somebody, but you know that somebody else is looking on, and you're arguing for the sake of the spectator. You're trying to demonstrate some kind of position, not necessarily because you believe you can actually convince the person you're arguing with directly, but because somebody else might be listening or looking on that might benefit from that exchange. Those, I think, are good reasons to argue with people. But then if my goal or my desire or intention is to educate, convince the person I'm arguing with, first of all, I need to make sure that person is capable of being convinced, if that person is actually capable of being educated. Even if I'm convinced that I'm 100% right and they are 100% wrong, if I find that person is not educatable, then what's the point? I'm gonna end up wasting time and not reaching my goal. So, how do you know that? How do you find out if the person is actually capable of being convinced of anything? Even if you have if your position is perfectly correct and they are mistaken. Here's an important observation that I want to share with you. In order to be able to convince anybody of anything, that person needs to be, convince is a bad word. Sorry, take that back. In order to be able to educate anybody, that person has to be capable of being educated. And the most important quality for that is what I would refer to as intellectual honesty. Intellectual honesty means that a person is going to follow some kind of ordered thought process and is going to use logic and reason in trying to both arrive at their own conclusions and trying to defeat or debunk your position. They're going to respect reason. They're going to respect logic. And that might lead them into a conflict. And that leads us into conflict many times. Whenever I am presented with a position or an idea that immediately, before I've given it any thought, just out of hand, immediately makes me uncomfortable emotionally, a position or an idea or a concept that produces a strong emotional response in me, negative emotional response, or positive emotional response, mostly negative, that's a great chance for me to examine a certain thing. I find that sadly most people will just follow their feelings. They just follow the emotion, and even if you present a perfect argument that they cannot refute, an argument that they cannot poke any holes in, you give them data, you give them the argument, the logic is impenetrable, it's unassailable, but the conclusion, they don't like the conclusion. They're going to reject the conclusion anyway. Even if they absolutely know that the conclusion is the truth, they will reject it because emotionally it makes them uncomfortable. So that's what I mean by intellectual honesty. If I present both my conclusion and my method to you, if I present my line of reasoning, my logic, the steps that I make going from point A to point B to point C to point D and so forth before I arrive at my conclusion. If I present all of this to you, then you either have to point to an error in my reasoning, you have to point to a logical error or a fallacy that I've committed, or you have to accept my conclusion. You don't get to not be able to assail my logic, but still reject my conclusion. You don't get to do that, if you're intellectually honest, of course. So I've argued with a lot of people, and I've found that roughly 9 out of 10 do not possess the intellectual honesty that is a prerequisite, unfortunately, for any kind of sensible conversation, any kind of discussion or debate. I can tell you right now, it makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. It's a waste of your time to argue with someone who's not intellectually honest. And again, we know this. We may get the emotional response to an idea that we hear and we don't like it. We don't know why we don't like it. And then if we look at the reasoning behind it, it's kind of okay. It kind of makes sense, but we still don't like the idea. What are we going to do? We're going to change our position because we've actually been educated. Some kind of truth has been shown to us that reasonably we should not be against this, but we're still against this. We have to either find an error or accept that we were wrong. And this the accepting that you're wrong, the moment where you go beyond your emotion, beyond your knee-jerk emotional response to an idea or a concept or a position, that is where you exercise intellectual honesty, and that makes you a better person. You become bigger, you become better, because you're able to, what's the word I'm looking for? The priorities are straight. The priorities are right with you. You value truth more than you value your own feeling. So I would suggest that if you want to argue with somebody, really argue something serious, something interesting. You want to run a test some kind of test to see if this person possesses intellectual honesty or not. I think most people are unaware of how important it is, and that's why most arguments just deteriorate into shouting matches. People are just, at the end of the day, people are just throwing accusations at each other and calling each other names instead of trying to get educated or educate someone else. An example, I got into a conversation in the comments section at one of my videos here on YouTube, and I asked the question, if the market forces have created such an abundance and wealth in every other industry, why can't the market forces do the same in healthcare? Well, the answer, of course, is because the market forces have not been allowed to work, but I asked this question. It's not as if I don't know the answer, but the guy comes into the comments section and says, well, because profits are not compatible with healthcare. Well, yeah, that's the question I'm asking. Why is it incompatible? Well, because it's in conflict. Well, I understand that incompatible means in conflict. Why? And he goes on and on without answering my actual question, and he starts throwing stats at me. Canada has better healthcare outcomes than the U.S., and I start looking at the stats, and one of the stats, that's an example of intellectual honesty, whether it's there or not. One of the stats is premature mortality, basically people dying early. Well, you know what? If you spend 10 seconds thinking about it, there's all sorts of reasons and factors contributing to people dying early. For example, automobile accidents. There's a different rate of automobile accidents with fatalities in the U.S. and in Canada. There's a difference in that, so you have to correct for that. Also, murder rates. Murder rates are higher in the U.S. Bottom line, this statistic, premature mortality, has nothing to do with the efficiency or the quality of the health care system. But the guy keeps arguing that it is. So I said to myself, this is my litmus test. And I asked him, in a personal message, just answer this one question, yes or no. Do you think that this statistic and the actual methodology thing, the methodology for producing that statistic, it said premature deaths from all causes, all right? Not just, medical causes, all causes. I just asked him to just let me know if you think that this statistic from all causes, as it is used in that study, is a reasonable measure of the quality of the healthcare system, yes or no. And that's my litmus test. If he says yes, then he's not capable of intellectual honesty. I'm not going to be talking to him anymore. If he says no, well, then he kind of has to go back on all the arguments that he made in the previous 10 posts. So far, I haven't received an answer. I'm still waiting.